Good day, friends. Today we are continuing our series on the Old Testament law, and this is part 2. As you might remember, in our last session we looked at the purpose of the law, and we saw that the first purpose was to show us our sin, and the second purpose was to point us to Jesus. In other words, the law itself could not save us, but it showed us that we needed a Savior, and it pointed us to Jesus. So today we are going to look at the topic of covenants, and I believe it is very important for us to have an understanding of different covenants, and especially the difference between the Old and the New Covenant. I'm sure you have heard about the Old Covenant or the New Covenant. I'm sure you've read through the Bible and you've seen there's an Old Testament and a New Testament, and you might be asking, Stefan, where do I fit into these covenants? And how should I relate to these covenants? These are very, very important questions, and we will be addressing them in the next lessons. And I believe as we understand covenants better, we'll have a clearer understanding of God and His heart towards us. To give you an example why it is important for us to understand covenants, I will just tell you a story from my own life. So we are ministering at the prison in Potchefstroom on a weekly basis, and we're meeting together with a group of men, doing a discipleship course with them. And one day as I walked into the group session, and one of the guys said, "You won't be able to join us today." When I asked him, "Why can't you join us today?" he said, "No, he's got a lot of pain and he would like to rest." When I asked him what is wrong, he said, "No, he got circumcised and thus he is in a lot of pain." Then I asked him, "But why did you get circumcised?" Then he said, "No, he read in the Old Testament that you should get circumcised." And I just felt so much sympathy and pity for this guy, and I just want to use this as an example to show you how important it is to understand the different covenants, how they work, and also where do we fit into them. Are we still under the Old Covenant, or did Jesus complete it, and are we now under the New Covenant? Those are very good questions, and again we will be addressing them in these sessions. So we will start off by looking at what the covenant is, and a simple definition of a covenant is an agreement, a bond or a union between two or more parties or two or more people. And in the Bible we find two different kinds of covenants. The first one is a conditional covenant, the second one an unconditional covenant. Now a conditional covenant is dependent on the faithfulness, the work and the input of both parties. So both parties have commitments to keep and a role to play in keeping this covenant. On the other hand, an unconditional covenant is only dependent on one party's faithfulness and input and work. It is also called a promise. So an unconditional covenant is just dependent on one party giving a promise and the second party receiving that promise. If I can use an example, you can imagine a tabletop as being the covenant, and the legs being the people upholding the covenant. So the legs are very important for a tabletop to keep it up. And in the same way, a conditional covenant is a tabletop with two legs. And the two parties both have to keep up the weight of this table or the weight of the covenant. In an unconditional covenant, on the other hand, there's only the one party that is keeping up the table. So that one party is taking all the responsibility, and he's both the legs of this covenant or keeping up this table. So I hope this helps you to imagine a covenant being the tabletop, and a conditional covenant having two legs and two parties keeping this covenant, whereas an unconditional covenant is just one party being both the legs, and the covenant is dependent on this party's strength, his faithfulness, and His goodness. Alright, so that's the difference between a conditional and an unconditional covenant. So now we're going to look at the Old Covenant. When I say and talk about the Old Covenant, I'm talking about the covenant that God made with the Israelites at Mount Sinai. This was after Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt and they came to Mount Sinai. And this was a conditional covenant. So in other words, it was dependent on God and on Israel, on their faithfulness, on their work and their input. There was a part for God to play and a part for the Israelites to play. Both of them had to keep this covenant, or had to keep this agreement, and had work to do to uphold this covenant. So it's very important for us to remember that this was a conditional covenant. If I can give you a verse just to confirm this, in Exodus 24 verse 7, it reads, "Then Moses took the book of the law of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people. And they said, 'All that the Lord has said we will do, and be obedient.'" It's very important for us to see this last part. It says, "All that the Lord has said we will do, and be obedient." So this verse makes it clear that the Israelites joined God in a covenant, and they said, "Lord, what you have said we will do." So there was a part for them to play, and in the next lesson we will also see that there were consequences to their actions. Because this was a conditional covenant, there were consequences to their actions. And we will look at that a bit more in the next lesson. So thank you for watching. Please also look at and watch the next lessons. And we are building on a very important topic here, which will later show us the character and the heart of God more clearly. Because many people are wondering, were God angry in the Old Testament? Was God evil in the Old Testament? Did God change between the Old and the New Testament? And we are building up towards answering those questions. So I really want you to go to my YouTube channel and watch those videos, and I pray that you will be blessed. Thank you for listening. God bless you.